Wait a minute, didn't Israeli intelligence already have a cable that said that there was going to be some sort of terror attack ahead of the Olympics just a couple days ago? And then this happens? Shalom, first and foremost, like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakah Kadosh, double honors, the elders and apostles, the great millstone, who are teaching this truth and sincerity. And a shout out to the Akims out there on the four corners of the earth proclaiming this truth. Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakah Kadosh, Brakatam. So, you know, Israeli intelligence tells you that there's going to be a terror attack, that Iran is planning a terror attack, and then all of a sudden, saboteurs come out, right? Coordinated sabotage paralyzes France's rail network as Olympics begin. Now, they're not saying that these are Iranian terrorists, but that's what the Israeli intelligence said a few days ago, right? SNCF trains in France at a standstill after a massive arson attack. Chaos for 800,000 travelers. The attack happened just before the Paris Olympic opening ceremony and very busy weekend of summer travel. So, who causes terror attacks and then tries to blame political enemies? The Israelis, Amalek, the least of the flock. Arsonists hit France's rail network ahead of Paris Olympics opening ceremony. 800,000 passengers impacted. So, yours truly was an Israeli attack, but they're going to blame it on Iran. France in disarray as arson attacks on high-speed rail routes bring nation to standstill. The acts of sabotage in France's key rail infrastructure occurred just hours before the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympic Games, affecting up to 1 million people. So, like everything else, this definitely is another, like a 9/11 type of coordinated attack by yours truly, Amalek, to blame whoever they want to. France's high-speed rail network was on its knees on Friday morning after being hit by a series of fires in what the Prime Minister described as acts of sabotage on the day of the Paris Olympic Games opening ceremony. Approximately 1 million commuters were affected by indefinite delays on what is a key date in the diary for many French city dwellers to mark the beginning of their month-long summer break. So, like everything else, here's some footage anyways. We all know, though, that that's what these gutter rats do. That way they can blame political enemies. And they'll believe whatever you want to believe, because that's how they control the news. That's what this devil does. 8 EU countries urge renewed ties with Bashar al-Assad to stem Syrian refugee tide. In other words, it's about high time that they can get the Syrians to return back to their country, you know. Syria wants them back, you know, and it's just that, like everything else, they're trying to also coordinate deals with Turkey to where it's not such a goddamn war zone, you know. Like, if some of them live in Aleppo and Idlib province, you know, that they might be able to return home. The last 2 years have been a handful of regional Southeast Asia countries to reestablish official relations with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad after launching a decade-long proxy war against him. For example, in May 2023, he was welcomed by Saudi Arabia, the official visit for the first time since the war started. And given the red carpet treatment by the Saudi Kingdom, and the United Arab Emirates was among those who have reopened the embassy in Damascus after nearly 13 years of severed ties. But the West, led by the US and UK, have still waged a maximum pressure campaign against the Syrian state after Assad emerged victorious in the war which sought to topple him. This has included greatly ratcheted sanctions, especially on energy imports, which has decimated the economy and unleashed runaway inflation. Washington has meanwhile, under multiple administrations, tried to lobby foreign terrorists to stay the course in isolating Damascus and keeping up the sanctions despite occasional Iranian oil tanker offloading to Syrian Mediterranean ports. You know, yeah, because you remember when they hijacked an Iranian vessel? Yep. America and Israeli state always interfering in business. 8 EU countries call for renewed ties with Assad to stem Syrian refugee tide. EU policy has failed. We must create a reality where residents have the will and interest to stay in Syria and return to it. The EU must lift some sanctions against President Bashar al-Assad. I guess if I wanted to read more, I had to come here. If I could figure out where I was at. And engage in diplomatic relations with them. The steps taken so far have mainly hurt civilians and not the regime, and authorities wrote the ministers. Well, like everything else, of course it was to punish Syria. Just treat them like Gaza, for that matter. Because it's the same gutter rats that are doing it. EU warns of impending fuel shortage. Is it because they sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline? I wonder if it was their good old ally America that did that for them. Through Ukraine, of course. Hungary risks depleting its reserves due to an oil transit spat with Ukraine, top officials said. Hungary will face a fuel shortage by September if solution to the oil transit dispute with Ukraine is not found. Head of the Hungarian Prime Minister's office has warned Kiev stopped the transit of crude from major Russian oil supplier through the Druzhba pipeline to its neighbors Hungary and Slovakia last week, citing sanctions against Russia energy giant. So the EU nations are starting to get really mad with the whore Babylon the Great. You can see that building up. Chemical weapons attack against Lebanon. Israeli state strikes Lebanon with phosphorus bombs, several injured. Phosphorus bombs are chemical weapons. Make no mistake about it. These phosphorus bombs are banned under the Geneva Convention, but they launched a campaign against Saddam Hussein for the allegation that he was using chemical weapons, but it's okay that the Israeli state does it, right? And by the way, Saddam Hussein was not using chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Only the Israeli state uses these weapons, as well as the United States against the Syrians and Iraq. The only ones that have these weapons is the U.S. and the Israeli state, by the way. The Israeli state dropped banned phosphorus bombs onto areas in southern Lebanon as the regime escalates attacks on the Arab country. The regime released the munitions on the outskirts of the town of Rashaya al-Fakar on Friday. Lebanon's Al-Madian said Israeli warplanes had also launched strikes on the outskirts of southern Lebanon's Markaba, specifically the Mahra area, with missiles injuring several people. Israeli terrorists also shelled the southern town of Sheba. The regime has been waging insistent attacks against southern Lebanon since October 7, when it began the terror war on the Gaza Strip. The attacks have featured recurrent deployment of white phosphorus projectiles against civilian targets in densely populated areas. So, like everything else though, Israeli state is using chemical weapons, but you won't hear about that on the mainstream media. No, of course you won't, because they're always talking about how Israeli state has the right to defend itself, even if they must use chemical weapons, even if they must use the Samson option by taking out Damascus, which is what's going to cause Babylon the Great to get destroyed. It's going to come. And like everything else though, here are the real terrorists, as this Palestinian describes what it's like with Israelis dropping bombs on them every night. Now you know who the real terrorists are.
Just before we get to
and you won't hear that on CNN.
And other issues, just remind us what Israel has done to your family.
This is what happened to my family. My family were sleeping in their home in a safe area, instructed by Israel, when an Israeli bomb was dropped on my family, killing all of them. Total lack of accountability, massive graves, destruction of hospitals, schools, neighborhoods. I can't, no matter how hard I try to study what's going on in Gaza, words won't suffice.
I mean, what's it like actually being in London, knowing that this already unpopular Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer insists on supplying weapons to Netanyahu? Only in the past few days, his Foreign Secretary David Lammy, his first trip was to see Netanyahu for a photo call, said we have to keep supplying the weapons. Do you think any of these British weapons killed your family?
Of course, I know for sure that these British weapons killed my family. I know that my family was killed by an F-16 or F-35 bomber. And we know for a fact that parts of these weapons, parts of these vehicles that carried the bomb to my family, and parts of these bombs that killed my family were manufactured in the UK and in the US. And more than that, they have been providing Israel not only with the weaponry to kill us, but also with the diplomatic cover, with the media cover, with everything that Israel desires.
So as well as media censorship, I mean, do you think you can tie in, I mean, your project, We Are Not Numbers, the importance of culture in that way, to why, say, we didn't hear really about on NATO nation media about the Beijing Declaration, the unity of resistance, finally, of Palestine that's coming together. All we hear occasionally is Palestinians die.
They would never tell you about the culture, about the history of Palestine, the history of the Palestinians who have been living in these lands for hundreds of years, for a millennia. And unfortunately, this is what the media intends to do, and this is what we are trying to defy through the work of We Are Not Numbers. We try to defy the Western media by breaking the stereotypes that they often have on the Palestinians.
And you won't hear that on CNN, no. And that's why they ban things like RT and all that, because they don't want you to know the truth. U.S. armed Israeli state with 25,000 plus bombs, missiles since October 7. The United States has reportedly armed the Israeli state with upwards of 25,000 bombs and missiles since October 7, which marked the onset of Tel Aviv's yet ongoing genocidal war against the Gaza Strip. According to the report, American armed shipments to the occupied Palestinian territories throughout the war had featured over 20,000 unguided bombs, some 26,000 guided bombs, and 3,000 surgical strike missiles. How nice of them. You know, because the Israeli state has the right to defend itself. That's what they always say. U.S.-occupied terrorist Arab base comes under fresh attack in Iraq. And they'll claim a victim, right? And then they'll start launching their homicidal war against the region, even though Iraq and Syria has asked repeatedly, time and time again, to withdraw from their country. Airbase housing the U.S. terrorists in western Iraq come under fresh attack amid regional uproar against Washington's unsteady support for the Israeli state's genocidal war on the Gaza Strip. Several rockets were launched against the Ain al-Assad airbase, which is located in the Arab country's Anbar province on Thursday, Iraqi security officials said. 4 rockets fell in the vicinity of the outpost, one security source said. Another said an attack had occurred with a drone and 3 rockets and fell close to the base's perimeter. Over the past years, the outpost, together with the Al-Hasra airbase, which houses the American terrorists in the northern Iraqi Kurdistan region, has come under numerous attacks and protests of the American terrorist presence in the country's soil. So, like everything else, though, they'll play the victim role, kind of like their friend Amalek. Civil unrest is the next most predictive crisis for Babylon now. For the past 6 months, I've been writing about the clear uptick in civil war rhetoric with the establishment media in the U.S. And we all know the upcoming presidential election is the reason for it. The bottom line is that no matter who's in the White House in 2025, there will be mass violence, but most of this violence will be reserved for the possibility of Donald Trump's return. Yeah, you know, like Antifa and all this other stuff, you know, but it doesn't matter which one there is, because this is all predictive programming. The false left-right paradigm is dead, at least when it comes to the average American citizens. The political left is not just an innocent subset of the population being led astray by false leadership. But a lot of people still fall for the right-left paradigm. They still think that it's either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You know, and they just can't get out of that, you know. Of course, like everything else, though, you know, these people, man, you know, they'll just continue to vote for unworthy rulers, which is what the next videos will be. But I'm going to save that for the longer length of this and just, you know, keep it short for the YouTube portion of this. You know, that way my videos stay on YouTube, as you know. So, like everything else, though, you know, we know that, you know, these are one of many things, but make no mistake about it, you know. You know, we're going to see uprises. We're going to be seeing a lot of things take place just right before all hell breaks loose. You know, but civil war, you know, that's That's spoken of here in Isaiah chapter 19. In verse 2, I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, modern day Egyptians, of course talking about America, Babylon the Great. And everyone shall fight against one another, against their brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt shall fall in the midst thereof. In other words, Babylon the Great will fall. And I will destroy the counsel thereof. You know, the leadership. They that seek to their idols, you know. what do they call that show? American Idol? And to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. Yeah, all their idols and all that, it's going to fail them, right? I mean, you saw a lot of them trying to promote, you know, you getting, you know, something very special for you that was going to save your life, but it really didn't. Never made you immune or anything, but these celebrities sure did promote it. I remember, you know, Arson Hall and Whitney, or not Whitney Houston, the other one, Mariah Carey, and all of them, you know, acted like they got it, and you find out that it wasn't even real, but they acted like they got it, right? The Egyptians will I give over into the hands of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. Now, often when that term comes up, the Lord of hosts is usually talking about the weapons of his indignation. So that we know that that's further coming. The Lord of hosts is the weapons of his indignation. And that's coming to Babylon the Great. The waters shall fail from the sea, and the rivers shall be wasted, dried up. So there is a famine that's coming. And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and flags shall wither. You know, and like everything else though, you know, at the very end of it, I'm going to jump down to verse 16. In that day shall Egypt be like unto a woman, you know, and again they call her Babylon the Great, right? Daughter Babylon, etc. And it shall be afraid and fear because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which shall he shaketh over it. Which again are the weapons of his indignation in most cases when you see that written. And the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Everyone that maketh mention thereof shall be afraid in himself, because the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he hath determined against it. You know, hey, they do fear what we're saying out there. They really do, even though right now they make a mockery because they don't see it and all that. But when things are getting closer and closer to the nuclear war and all that, they're going to really start to fear that, because the Lord of hosts is going to be mustered up to battle. And that's what you're going to see as we get closer and closer. But Esau's going to try to do one more thing and try to get you to comply. Just like he got you to comply in 2020 on up. You know, he will try to get you to comply with this. It's going to be more of a forced compliance, causing all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive that implant. The implantable microchip. That's what's coming. So hopefully this has been edifying. For that I want to say Bracha the Yahweh, Bracha the Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem Rakah Kadosh, Wa Abal Babal. Make no mistake about it, that was a coordinated attack planned by the Israelis themselves. So that way they could get a more coordinated attack against Iran or whatever other political enemy they have. But they always say Iran. Shalom.